I work as a volunteer in a wolf sanctuary up in the Pacific Northwest. It's a fairly small establishment, and a fairly young one, too. We started during the 2010s, and we kept going as a small but determined group of people. We take things seriously, and we live by our desire to help these majestic beasts. The sanctuary stands on a pretty remote spot, completely surrounded by forest. We like the thought of keeping our animals as close as possible to their habitat, and this position also lets us keep track fairly easily of the wolves we set free after the rescue. It isn't an easy life by any means, but we've managed to adjust to it, some more than others. For me, these forests really feel like home, and once we got our cabin up and running with electricity and internet, I stopped caring about my life in the nearby town. I had all I wanted right there, among the trees. However, for the sake of everyone's mental well-being, we take turns to stay in here. No more than 2 weeks, no less than 2 people. The woods can really strain your mind, and that's not optimal when your daily routine revolves around caring for wild animals that can easily weigh more than 100 pounds, and could potentially tear you to shreds in mere seconds. This time, it was me and Oliver's turn. It was a pretty chill time. Oliver is amazing at his job. The weather was nice despite the low temperatures, and our residents were absolutely lovely. By residents, I mean 4 wonderful specimens of northwestern gray wolves, rescued as pups and raised by us in captivity. 4 wonderful females, Artemis, Tia, Ice, and Dawn. They are a considerable amount of work, but it's really worth it. So as I was saying, things were going pretty smooth. Then, yesterday morning, one of the GPS devices we use to track rescued wolves sent out a signal. Nothing really out of the ordinary. This signal in particular lets us know that the device has not moved at all in the last 24 hours. It could mean that the animal is hurt, but most times it simply means that the device has somehow detached from the collar of the wolf and needs to be recovered. So Oliver decided to go and check it out. The day went on as usual, until early afternoon. Oliver contacted me via radio, stating that he was rushing back to camp. I could hear his voice being a little different, less composed and calm than usual. About 20 minutes later, he rolled into the front of the sanctuary with our pickup. "Man, you gotta take a look at this," he said, getting off the vehicle in a hurry. As I approached the back of the pickup where Oliver was standing, I could immediately feel the pungent smell of rotting flesh. Oliver said nothing. He just stared down, eventually covering his nose. On the back of the pickup laid the corpse of a wolf we rescued months back. His beautiful black fur ruffled, his eyes and mouth wide open, and 3 huge slashes on the side of his body. Those are way too big, I remember thinking instinctively. We tried to assess the situation back in the hut. He decided to drive back to town before sundown, so he could get the carcass to the local vet in the hope of getting some answers. He proposed to ask someone to come and cover him for the night, but I assured him I would be just fine. He left shortly after, leaving me alone with the wolves, who were wandering around their pen, probably alerted by the strong smell of death still faintly present in the air. I finished my tasks for the day, prepared some canned soup for dinner, and ate it straight out of the can, while trying to wrap my head around the wounds on that wolf. I had never seen anything like it, and a quick check in the sanctuary's archive revealed that something like that had just never happened before. It was common to find dead wolves, but it was way less common to find massacred ones. Just as I was skimming through all our reports, I realized that one of the wolves was loudly growling outside. A weird behavior for sure. I looked out the window. It was Artemis, on the far side of the pen, right at the fence, growling at the dark tree line just ahead. I found it extremely weird for her to do such a thing. I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside. I could see my breath, and I realized that the evening air had gotten slightly colder than usual. I made my way to the fence, opened the gate, and squeezed myself in. Tia, Ice, and Dawn came out of their enclosures and quickly made their way around me. Now, this wasn't unusual per se, but the way they kept their posture low was. They were clearly alarmed by something. I called for Artemis, to no avail. She just kept on growling at seemingly nothing. In the air, the same rotting smell was still present, if not even stronger than before. This couldn't have been possible. The whole situation gave me a gut feeling like no other. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I was feeling exposed. Part of me wanted to get the wolves and crawl back in the hut with them. Clearly not the brightest train of thought. I slowly made my way to Artemis. When I placed my hand on her back, she stopped growling and started softly whimpering to me, briefly looking at me before staring back into the dark. She seemed relieved. I flashed my light in the dark. Nothing but trees. No movement. Nothing at all. The wolves didn't cut back on their alerted state, though. They were still scared by something. I started taking them back to the enclosures and locking them in. As I was closing Tia's door, Dawn started growling too, immediately followed by Ice from inside her enclosure. My unease started to spiral out of control, so I hurried the whole process. Once the doors were locked, I started walking back to the hut, but then I realized how silent the whole place had become. Dead silence all around. Then, a faint shuffling, some twigs breaking. My heart sank. It came right from where Artemis was growling at. I stood there like a deer in headlights, pondering my options. I decided to check once again, just to be sure, before going back to the hut as fast as possible, closing the door, closing all the shutters, and just trying to get some sleep. I walked slowly, flashlight in my right hand, pointing the beam left and right. Then I saw them. 2 eyes in the darkness, shining back at me. 2 amber dots about a foot from the ground. The eyes of a wolf? As I kept on staring at them, wondering what was going on, something impossible happened. Without breaking eye contact, the dots started lifting up and up and up. When they stopped, they stood among the pine needles, about 10 feet high, before vanishing. I kept hearing twigs breaking before silence fell back around me. That was it. I darted back to the hut, closing every damn shutter and bolting the doors. I laid there in complete darkness and in complete silence, hardly getting any sleep at all. As I write this, the sun is way up in the sky, but I still can't shake off the dreadful feeling those eyes casted upon me. The wolves seem to be fine, and Oliver should be returning later today. This forest felt like my home. Today, I don't feel so sure about that anymore. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I've always remembered these experiences from my childhood as the most confusing/scary times growing up. My brother is 3 years younger than me, and this all started happening when he was around 4 or 5. We can call my brother B. B as a child had health problems and needed a lot of different surgeries. He was in and out of the hospital often. The way my mom will retell this is that this all started with my brother having horrendous night terrors. So bad that he would sit upright in bed with a blood-curdling scream, thrashing his arms and legs. When B would wake up, he would have no recollection of his dream. But as time went on, B started to talk to someone at night, and his toy fire trucks would start to light up with the siren going off. My mom would wake up in the morning and the clocks would all be set to 2:15 a.m. In our house, we had a storage room under the stairs. The storage room was right next to B and I's playroom. B would always say that John and his mom lived in that storage room, and he would go knock on the door and say, "Hi, John's mom, can John come and play with me and my sister?" I never thought anything of it being a child, and my parents just told me that B had an imaginary friend. B would want us to set an extra plate for John at the dinner table, buckle him into the car, etc., and would freak out completely if my parents didn't comply. We had weird things going on in the house. My baby dolls would go off non-stop, to the point my mom took the batteries out and shoved the dolls in the bottom of the toy box, and one in particular still went off even without the batteries. We also had this motion sensor Big Bird plushie that constantly went off when nobody was in the room, and the toy would be in the off position. This went on for at least a year. My mom has said the breaking point was my brother crying in the kitchen, saying him and John got in a fight. He said, "I told John we can't be friends anymore because I have bones and he doesn't." That same night, I woke up to a woman calling my name and standing at the side of my bed. When I rolled over and opened my eyes, she immediately asked me,
"Where's John?"
I didn't reply. She seemed to get upset and asked again.
"Where's John?"
I again didn't reply, and was so scared I rolled over and closed my eyes. When I rolled back over, she was gone, so I booked it into my parents' room. My mom let me sleep in their bed for the night. The next night, I remember my mom talking to a priest and another strange man. My mom has since told me the priest was to bless the house, and the other man was a medium to help John and his mom cross over. The medium was able to tell my mom that John and his mom passed away in a house fire, which has always messed with me because the main toy that went off was B's fire truck. I mean, it was set off every night. Was John trying to tell us something? The medium also said that John had attached to B the last time he had surgery. After the blessing and encounter with the medium, John and his mom were never heard from again. I hope they found their way to the light. Hi all. Thought I'd share something interesting that happened to me about 15 years ago. I was about 18 and was hanging out at my friend Joanne's house with some other school friends. Can't quite remember how we got onto the subject, but towards the end of the evening, Joanne thought it would be fun to perform a seance. Joanne and her family were from Cape Town, South Africa, and had a deep-rooted interest in the spiritual, or at least that's how Joanne made it out to us. With the lights off and candles lit, we all sat at a round table, with cards fanned out around the edge. Each card had a letter of the alphabet, arranged A to Z, and a shot glass placed in the middle. Joanne starts speaking out to the spirit in Afrikaans. I remember pulling a face and rolling my eyes. It was too dark for anyone to take offense. At the time, I was an insufferable, enlightened atheist teen dork. You know the type, cringy 4chan edgelord, who thinks any form of spirituality or religion is beneath me and my superior intellect. I never wore a fedora, but I was damn close. However, what was about to happen made me question everything. It started mundane enough. A few questions were asked, and the shot glass we were resting our fingers on started to move to and fro, until eventually one of my friends asked the spirit if they were associated with anyone in the room. The shot glass moved directly towards me. Incredulous, I asked the spirit, "If you're associated with me, then what's my mother's maiden name?" My eyes fixate on the letters that spell out her maiden name, Jones. But the glass started spelling out something different. First, the glass went to T, then H, then O. I thought then it was bullshit, as it was completely wrong. Then I was struck by a horrific realization. When my mom was 6 months old, her biological father died of a heart attack. And a year after that, she took her stepfather's name. I completely forgot this in the moment, as I was expecting the glass to read out the maiden name she had had for the majority of her life, but it was actually spelling out her original maiden name of Thompson. It was a fact so trivial that I barely remembered it myself. It was something never talked about, even within my family, as it happened so long ago. It would be hard to believe that any of my friends would know this esoteric piece of my family's history that occurred 20 years before I was even born. But nonetheless, somehow it was being spelled out in front of my very eyes. Thompson. My school friends and I wouldn't talk about anything deeper than video games and tits at that age. There's no way I ever mentioned this to any of them. It's not like one of my pot-smoking loser friends had a copy of my mom's birth certificate, and none of them had ever met anyone else in my family. There was literally no way anyone could have known this. Before I could contemplate this for too long, or ask any other questions to my ghostly associate, Joanne's mom came into the room and turned the lights on, and with a thick South African accent, yelled at Joanne to stop messing around with this silly crap, and put a definitive stop to the proceedings. Of course, at the time, I played it off as a prank, but the more I think of it, the more my mind wonders, did something paranormal actually happen that night? I know it's nothing dramatic or exciting. I didn't see an apparition or a cryptid, but unlike 90% of the shit you read on Reddit, this experience is actually true, and something that to this day I can't explain. I'd love to hear your thoughts. When I was a kid, my mom and I lived with my grandparents in their 3-story house. It had a basement, a ground floor, and a second floor. To give context, there was a living room directly in front of the stairs leading upstairs, so you could see my mom's room on the left, important for later, and my grandparents' room on the right. My room was further down the 2nd-story hall, but I spent a lot of time alone and with my uncle in the basement. For more context, the basement was a huge rectangle, with one room directly to the left of the stairs, my uncle's room, and one room in the far back left corner, a storage room, also important for later. Now to the actual story. This all happened when I was 8 or 9. Can't remember exactly. It was around when Halo 3 came out. The first time it happened, I was home sick from school. In reality, I just wanted to play Halo, bro. But everyone in the house worked, so I was alone, and my uncle was at school. The only Xbox in the house was in the basement, so naturally, when everyone left, I got up and went to go play Halo. I'm down there for a few hours playing games happily, and all of a sudden, the storage room I mentioned earlier creaks open ever so slightly, just enough to see a slit of darkness. And plain as day, I hear my mom call me from what sounded like the furthest corner of the storage room, saying she needed help putting something away. My mom wasn't home at the time, and I knew this. I didn't turn anything off and bolted upstairs. I laid on the couch until my uncle got home. He asked why I left the Xbox on, and he thought I was sick and laughed at me. I just laughed back and said, "My bad, won't happen again." The only other time this happened was actually during a family dinner. We had cousins and pretty much our entire family over for a holiday. My cousins and I were playing with Nerf guns in the living room. They got hungry and went to get more food, so I sat by myself in the living room, reloading my magazines with darts, when something caught my eye upstairs. It was my mom's room door. It had opened. It was like 8 p.m., so it was dark upstairs. All of a sudden, my mom comes walking out of the darkness. She kind of waved me over to her with a weird smile on her face. I yelled to her, "Why?" But she just kept waving me over. I got up and started walking to the stairs. But before I went up, I looked to my right and saw my mom talking with my aunt at the dinner table. I ran to her and asked if she had been upstairs, and she said no. I went back into the living room and looked back up the stairs, and her door was closed again. That was the last time anything like that ever happened, but it still gives me the creeps when I think about it. I will try to make this as straightforward as possible, considering I'm boarding a flight in half an hour to go visit my hometown and my parents where this happened. But here it is. When I was around 18 years old, I had been paying my girlfriend at the time a visit and ended up losing track of time. It was around 1 in the morning, in the dead of winter. I would say maybe late January or February. While relaxing with my girlfriend, I had neglected to pay attention to the weather, or even look out the window. A very intense snow squall rolled in, and had developed into a blizzard. After I did realize this, as well as the time, I concluded that the smartest move would be to leave, and make the around 25 to 30-minute drive, even in clear weather, back to my house. Where I live is rather remote. The Amish capital of the world, actually, if you're unfamiliar with Lancaster. But it's miles and miles of rolling hills, crop fields, and woods, with several small towns scattered about amongst them. About 10 minutes into my drive, I'm having a very difficult time seeing through the endless onslaught of fluffy snow, and the fact that I had left my glasses in my girlfriend's bedroom didn't help. I was driving at maybe 15 to 20 miles per hour, considering the roads had not yet been plowed and were pretty slick. I got to a familiar portion of my drive, about 2 or 3 miles from my old high school. As I'm creeping down the country back roads, I can barely make out some sort of color in my low beams, about 20 yards in front of me. Curiously, I angled my front end toward the thing that I was seeing, which was also on my side of the road. As I got close enough to make out what I was seeing, I realized it was a hunched old woman, and some kind of blankets and a long skirt. Instantly, I was thinking this is my chance to be a good Samaritan and save a life. It was all of 5 degrees outside that night, and this old woman was very far into the nothingness of the land, with no known homes around. I crept up next to her and rolled down my window. At this point, she was no longer being illuminated by my headlights, and was alongside my car, maybe around 6 feet outside of my passenger side window in the heavy snow. My initial thoughts are, this old woman must have dementia or Alzheimer's, some sort of neurological disease. I called out my window to her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you in need of any help? What are you doing out here? You'll freeze." She didn't respond, and as a matter of fact, just kept slowly creeping forward through the snow. I used my phone flashlight to get a little bit of a better view of her. She was wrapped in colorful blankets, and had one sort of shrouding her head, so I could not see her face. I also took note that it didn't seem like she had any shoes on. Once more I asked, "Ma'am, why don't you let me take you somewhere warm, and we can get you some help?" She stopped walking. I was already beginning to shiver just from the cold wind blowing in through my window. The snow was still coming down, just as hard as ever. She stood there, facing away from me. "Lady, can you hear me?" I asked, not quite annoyed, but confused. Almost as soon as I finished asking this, The old woman swiveled toward my window and stood straight up. This tiny, decrepit old woman became a presence like I had never seen. Suddenly, the frail woman stood tall, taller than me, maybe 6'3". Her face was not hers. It seemed as though whatever it was had on a hyper-realistic old woman's mask, and the largest, most soul-piercing baby blue eyes I have ever seen in my life. So large, in fact, it appeared like they were not even naturally possible for a human to have. But nonetheless, they were beaming at me from behind the holes that were vacant, where the old woman's own eyes should have been. The sight took my breath away. Without hesitating, I accelerated my car and slipped a bit in the snow. Long story short, I ended up getting home after calling my ex and telling her to lock her doors. I mentioned it to my parents, and they said it was probably some sick criminal trying to rob some sorry sucker like myself. I tell myself that's probably all it was. But something about the almost animated movements it made, the way it seemingly added feet onto its height before my eyes, and its own eyes, I can still picture them so vividly all these years later. They were not natural. Whatever I saw out there surely would have succumbed to the elements, and in a small town like mine, it definitely would have made the news. I'm a believer in paranormal and ghosts and such, but that was a physical being. I can't explain what I saw any better than this, let alone give it a plausible explanation. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Links to all my shit are down in the description. Thank you to Lizard for helping me out again. She's awesome. I did put out a skit the other day, and I'm going to start doing that with my favorite skits that I've done. So keep an eye out for those. And I've got some new shirt ideas coming. And that's about it. Be good to animals, even people. See ya. As soon as I start recording, there's like a racetrack next to me. And listen to my stomach. Isn't that great?